Sit comfortably, fasten your seatbelts, and get ready for a long, rough ride. You can watch it in one go. You can cut it into chunks. But whatever you decide to do, let's watch a very interesting and a very difficult topic. Palestinians in Jordan. Are you ready? Well, let us begin. Our story begins in the year 1916, partly because of fresh pan-Arabism and partly because of the influence of the UK. Sharif of Mecca Hussein begins the Great Arab Revolt. Now, the Brits promised him that the Arabs in the Near East, in the Levant, will become independent from the Ottoman Empire. So in theory, it is him. In reality, his 4 sons leading the revolt. Among the 4 sons, 2 are the most important ones, Faisal and Abdallah. So the Great Revolt is on, but it turns out, in the meantime, secretly, Brits are talking to somebody else. Mark Sykes on the British side, and on the French side, François Picot, hold secret talks. They already cut the cake, and they came up with a treaty called with their names today, Sykes-Picot. They basically split Levant into zones of influence. Modern Syria and Lebanon are with France, and modern Iraq, Jordan, Israel, Palestine is the British zone of influence. So the talks were secret, but very soon they came out to light, and obviously the Arab world is furious. But eventually Ottoman Empire did fall, and Arabs are not independent. You have the League of Nations after First World War, which is basically kind of a tool of European colonial powers, and they decided to give mandates in the Near East to France and the UK, and lo behold, those zones of influence under the mandates of the League of Nations are pretty much like the Sykes-Picot Treaty. So here's the thing. Arabs, once again, are furious, but hey, Britain actually kept their promise. They kept their word, all of them. They promised the Arabs independence from the Ottoman Empire, and they are independent from the Ottoman Empire. And the fact they depend on France and the UK now, well, details. Well, we have to also admit that France governs their mandate like a colony directly. UK, well, they tried to do something nice, at least for the family of the Sharif. So Faisal becomes king of Iraq, and for Abdallah, a new country was created, the Emirate of Transjordan. Now let's have a look at the river itself, because it is obviously a big natural barrier, but I think it was also a big psychological barrier. You have a big river in an area which is mostly desert. It had to impress the people living around it, and well, it ended up in the name of the country, Transjordan, behind the river Jordan. And that's obviously a sign of its importance, but the river itself was never really an administrative limit. Well, now it is. It becomes a border between officially independent Emirate of Transjordan and Palestine, which is under direct British rule. And that's because of another promise they made during the First World War. The famous Balfour Declaration about a new home for the European Jews in Palestine. So Palestine remains under direct British rule, which is for us a very important moment. This is the point where the stories of Palestinians and Jordanians start going their separate ways. They live under 2 different realities, so the stories become different. 2 new national identities start being created. When it comes to the story of Transjordan, we are going to get there soon. When it comes to Palestine between the wars, very interesting story, but it has to wait for the great Israeli-Palestinian adventure. Now, Let's fast forward towards the end of Second World War. So in theory, UK is one of the victors. In reality, they are battered and destroyed. So after Second World War, they start to dismantle the empire. And one of the first places they start dismantling is the Near East. And I think that's because if you make somewhere quite a lot of a mess, the best thing is to leave the solution of the mess to somebody else. So the conflict between Arabs and Jews in Palestine, it's up to the United Nations now to do something about it. And they start dealing with it. In 1947, they come up with a plan of partition of Palestine between Arabs and Jews. Now the plan is cartographer's nightmare. Nobody on the ground was really consulted, so nobody really likes it. But in the end, the Jews decided that's what it is. 14th of May 1948, they declare the independence of Israel. Palestinians do not do the same, as they completely reject the partition plan, and they are sure, with the help of their Arab neighbors, they will squash the newly independent Israel, so the declaration will be null and void. And here's the problem. Not only that Israel survived, but they won the war to such an extent they grabbed some pieces of the land that was, according to the partition plan, allocated to the Arabs. For the Palestinians, that was an absolute catastrophe, which, by the way, is not my words. In Israel, the War of 48 is called War of Independence. In the Arab world, it is called An-Nakba, which is literally catastrophe. For many people, the consequences are very harsh. Roughly 700,000 Palestinians have to escape or are expulsed from their homes, and they go to the neighbors. Roughly a half, 350,000 people go to, and here we have a very important controversy. Turns out it wasn't a catastrophe for all Arabs. Egypt grabs the Gaza Strip. Syria grabs the Golan Heights. But maybe the biggest victor after Israel is Jordan, or actually still Transjordan, since 46 a kingdom, not emirate anymore, but still officially Transjordan. Turns out their army, the so-called Arab Legion, was the only Arab army that was up to the task. They fight against Israel pretty much as equals, so they grabbed a lot of land west of the Jordan River. Maybe more importantly still, at least from the symbolical point of view, after fierce fighting, they control 3/4 of Jerusalem, including the Old Town. So when in 1949 the ceasefire was finally sealed, a lot of land is controlled by King Abdallah himself. And do not forget, he started 30 years earlier the Great Arab Revolt, thinking of creating a big Arab country in the Levant, and he never forgot about that dream. Hence, in 1949, after the ceasefire with Israel, there is no independent Palestine proclaimed. In 1950, Jordan, actually still Transjordan, annexed what we call today the West Bank and Jerusalem with the Old Town. 30 years late, but for Abdallah that was the first step on the road to fulfill his old dream. A great Arab country in the Levant with Hashemite dynasty at the head. Now, for us, it's an extremely important moment for a number of reasons. First, this is the moment when the name of the country was changed. It's not Transjordan anymore. It's not on the other side of the river. Now the country is on both sides, so it's the Kingdom of Jordan. But look again at how important the river is, influencing still the name of the country. Second thing, in a way, it is the Jordanian army that created modern Palestine, because if Palestine becomes independent one day, it will be the territory we call today the West Bank, which is the territory controlled by Jordanian Arab Legion in 1949. Third point is kinda absurd really, because with the annexation of the West Bank, Jordan pretty much literally from one day to another grew 3 times, from 400,000 inhabitants to 1.2 million. And if that's not enough, look at the structure of the country. Now, 2/3 are Palestinians, and again, that's pretty much from one day to another. And if that's not enough, plenty of refugees come. So, official story, 350,000 come to Jordan. It's a bit more complicated. To Jordan as it is today, 40-50,000. The rest stay on the West Bank. So actually, they didn't go to Jordan. Jordan came to them, I think, is a better way to put it. So, of course, there is a difference, but politically speaking, in the year 1950, we have officially 350,000 Palestinian refugees on top of the people who already lived there before. And this is a very important point when we talk about Palestinian refugees or simply Palestinians in Jordan. We have to look at the specific dates. After 1950, a Palestinian living in Eastern Jerusalem is, in theory, a Palestinian in Jordan. And to the fourth point, no less important than the others, what do Palestinians think of it? Well, Palestinians are not one person copied a million times. There are plenty of people, so they have plenty of different opinions. Not everybody was against it. There were old, important families who favored the annexation. Actually, there were important families who were thinking of it 20, 30 years earlier. So there are people who have nothing against it. There were reunions of some of those old important families, officially pronouncing Abdallah as their king as well. A great example here is Alia, the third wife of King Hussein, the Queen of Jordan. She is from the Tukan family, one of those old important Palestinian families who favored the annexation. One of the Tukans was actually ambassador of Jordan in Egypt, which is an important post. So here's a little anecdote. When still a teenager, Hussein spent 2 years in Egypt in high school, and he would visit very often the ambassador. So he met Alia for the first time when she was 1. But let's leave anecdotes aside. Let's go back to the story. As you can see, there were people who favored the annexation, but on the other hand, let's call it national movement was already strong in Palestine, and even if they saw people on the East Bank as cousins or even brothers, the idea is brothers, yes, but each brother should live in a separate home, so they wanted independent Palestine. Many Palestinians already felt different and sometimes even, I would say, better. For example, Transjordan in the 40s, if I remember right, had 2 high schools. Many young elite Palestinians from bigger cities were better educated, looking down at people from the East Bank. They did not want to be governed by Amman. Also, when it comes to the Hashemites, it was kind of well known they don't hate the Jews. Abdallah was supposedly in the 30s in secret meeting with some important Zionists. We know today that's actually true. So, for example, the refugees who wanted to go back home eventually saw Abdallah and annexation as an hostile act. They would see Abdallah as equal to the Jews, partitioning the Palestinian lands between them. So, what about Abdallah himself? First of all Palestinians, including most of the refugees, straight up become citizens of the Kingdom of Jordan. And officially, there is equality between the 2 banks of the river. A symbol here is the parliament from the 50s. It had 60 seats, half East Bank, half West Bank. Especially the pro-annexation Palestinian elites are most definitely part of the system. But that's pretty much theory. In reality, plenty of Palestinians were saying that there is no true equality. They don't have access to important places in administration, for example. But maybe more importantly, Abdallah begins social engineering. No more Palestinians, no more Transjordanians. There is only one nation now, Jordanians. So it is Abdallah who forbid to use the word Palestine and Palestinians in official documents. It's not Israel, as we would think today. It was Abdallah. There's West Bank, there's East Bank, and both are Jordanians. There's a new slogan appearing: Jordan is Palestine, Palestine is Jordan. It's all one people now. Oh, many people did not like this engineering. So what happens very soon? Abdallah paid the highest price. In 51, he visits Jerusalem, the alternative capital of the kingdom. There were rumors that he actually came to meet Israelis and sign a peace treaty, which means Palestinian refugees will never go back home. So, when he was about to enter the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a Palestinian assassin shot and killed him. Actually, he was not alone. He was with his 15-year-old grandson Hussein, and I don't know if it's true or a urban legend, but supposedly just before entering the mosque, the grandfather told him to put on a medal. The assassin shot Hussein as well, and the bullet ricocheted off the medal. True or not, this is the beginning of politics for 15-year-old Hussein. And within only a number of years, he officially becomes king of Jordan, aged roughly 18 in 53. So here we have a very important person for us entering the world stage. Hussein remained king of Jordan for roughly 45 years, one of the most important people in the second part of 20th century in the Near East. He will keep popping up during this episode, and it is pretty much impossible to talk about anything in the Near East without King Hussein being somewhere around the corner there. And preparing for the episode, I read a lot of books. My favorite is The Lion of Jordan, which is a biography of the king, and honestly, I hope one of those days Netflix or somebody will make a series about him. A truly fascinating character. But there I go, straying off topic again. Let's come back to the story. So you have young King Hussein not only inheriting all the issues of his grandfather, but there are a number of new issues arising. First of all, let's have a look at the international board. Who actually accepted the annexation? Well, pretty much nobody. Pakistan, which is kind of random really, and I have no idea why they did, but Pakistan will appear later for a second or two. Second country, the United Kingdom. And here it's kind of obvious why. They were super happy that the mess they left behind them kind of got solved, at least it seems. What about the rest? Especially, what about the Arab neighbors of Jordan? Well, not only that they do not accept the annexation, but here we have another important detail to add to the story. In the 1950s, a new version of Pan-Arabism sweeps through the lands. It is the revolutionary version, and Nasser, who was a very long time president of Egypt, is the face of this new revolutionary Pan-Arabism. He was actually so popular in the 50s, 60s, people would say he appears in any Arab country, he is going to be elected over the local politicians. And actually, that is true of Jordan as well. In the middle of the 50s, Hussein did a little experiment. Truly democratic elections, free press. Who won? Revolutionary Pan-Arabists. So the experiment had to be quickly dissolved. But it shows you the power of the new ideology, and soon Syria becomes another adherent to it. So Egypt and Syria start viewing Jordan as a hostile country, considering it a colonial creation, and King Hussein himself as a puppet of Western imperialism. In Iraq, the cousin of Hussein, Faisal II, is king, but not for long. 59, coup d'etat, and Iraq joins Syria in Egypt in hostility towards Jordan. Now in Saudi Arabia there are no revolutions, but the House of Saud was always a traditional rival of the Hashemites. They are also hostile to Jordan. And of course, Israel. is officially still state of war between the two countries, and it was actually not only in theory. Many of the Palestinian refugees try coming back home. Israel does not let them enter, so they start forming paramilitary groups attacking Israel. So Israel in retaliation attacks them, which means politically they attack the Kingdom of Jordan. So the situation at the Jordanian-Israeli border was always tense, with fights on both sides. Well, let's add to it another issue. Pan-Arabism was also very popular among Palestinians. So not only do they start forming paramilitaries, but they start taking over the revolutionary Pan-Arabic ideology. And among those groups, the most famous today is Fatah under equally famous Yasser Arafat. Already late 50s, a very interesting love-hate relationship develops between Arafat and King Hussein, a big rivalry because both consider themselves the voice of the Palestinian people. And I have to say, Arafat straight up strikes an important point. In 1964, the Arab League created Palestine Liberation Organization, which was kind of an umbrella organization for all the different paramilitary groups, but Fatah was the biggest among them, and straight up Arafat is a very important figure in the organization. They get, from the very beginning, a very strong support of Jordanian Arab neighbors, especially Nasser, so let's call them simply enemies of Jordan. Jordan still has some friends. Arab League is still not united on the issue of who is the voice of the Palestinians. Still some countries say Hussein should be one, but Arafat starts gaining an upper hand. On top of that, for Nasser, they are very important because he considers them kind of a fifth column, an organization that can destabilize the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan. More importantly still, Arafat is going to be an important asset for the coming conflict against Israel. Nasser is preparing for it. A united Palestinian organization will help. All of that is very important to understand what happened in very important moment for us today, late 60s, beginning of the 70s. King Hussein has to do something. He is losing control over his own country. So in 65, he decided to do something seemingly crazy. He is distancing himself from the West, and he became friend of Nasser himself. Now the move at the beginning was fantastic. People in Jordan are ecstatic, including Palestinians who now view King Hussein as a bit of a hero. But here's an important detail. Hussein left his army in the hand of the Egyptian generals. So when June 69 arrived and the long-awaited conflict begins, Jordan, whether they like it or not, they have to be part of the conflict. And they were not ready. Actually, no Arab country taking part in the conflict was ready, and the best way to see it is the name of the war, 6-Day War. And actually, the name in case of the West Bank is not true either. The conflict did not even last 4 days there. In less than 4 days, Israel takes control of the West Bank and Jerusalem. For Hussein, it was an absolute and complete disaster. Now, the conflict is kinda still there in the public space of Jordan. For example, the ruins of Gadara we visited in the last episode are not only ancient ruins, you will see also ruined bunkers there. As the place has great views, the hill was used during the war for bombardment of the Israeli territory. So this is one example, but you can also find military monuments. Now, I don't think that the 6-Day War is exactly celebrated, as it was a disaster, but still there are military monuments to the Jordanian army fighting in the war. Now, when I say a disaster, the Kingdom of Jordan of the time lost quite a sizable chunk of territory, And in theory, it also lost a big chunk of its population. In theory. Plenty of people ran across the river to the east. Some of those people are actually double refugees now because earlier they were flying from the 48-49 war. Well, anyway, several 100,000 people cross the river and they go into what we would call today Jordan proper. And many of them start going towards the main cities. Obviously, the capital Amman, but also Irbid in the north, and they start settling in already existing refugee camps or creating new ones. And I think it will be no surprise to anybody, it is mostly the poorest who have to go to the refugee camps. This is how, for example, Al-Wahdat camp is growing. It is a place which is going to come back later on, several times. But those who can afford it go into the cities, of course the capital Amman, and they start building new houses everywhere. Keep in mind that we are talking about a country which just lost a war. There's chaos, there's pretty much no control over anything, so whoever can, they go to cities and build houses anywhere possible, and some places which were impossible. And that's one of the keys to understanding the urban chaos of modern Amman. Many of the houses, many of the districts were built by Palestinian refugees after 67. But not all Palestinian refugees go to cities. Not only the regular people cross the river, but also the so-called Fedayeen, so the Palestinian guerrilla fighters. They continue fighting, so actually the name Six-Day War is not exactly right. They start building their camps not inside Jordan proper, but in the Jordan Valley, right east of the river. They continue fighting the partisan way now. And if they have camps right across the river, it is easy to attack the Israeli army in the West Bank or places in Israel proper. And late 67, there are so many attacks that the Israeli army decided to do something about it, and in March 68, they want to attack Karama, which was one of the biggest camps of Fatah. And they are convinced, after the humiliating victory over Jordanian army will not join the fight. So it is going to be only Israeli army versus the Fedayeen. They did attack Karama one of those days of March. Jordanian artillery joined the battle. So in the end, it is kind of an Israeli victory because officially the camp was demolished. But they paid a very high price, plenty of soldiers died, and they have to leave behind quite a lot of equipment. So, tactically speaking, it's an Israeli victory. In terms of honor and marketing, it's a huge win for the Fedayeen. Turned out that you can actually hurt the Israeli army. They are not invincible, and maybe it is the guerrilla, the partisan way of fighting that will bring about victory. The best way to see how it worked, within 48 hours, 5,000 new people joined the Fedayeen. And within Jordan in 67, there are 20,000 of them. Fatah alone was 10,000 guerrillas. Suddenly also plenty of financial support appears. Many Arab countries start sending money to the Fedayeen, so a new idea arises. If the armies of the Arab countries could not defeat Israel, maybe a big popular Palestinian uprising led by the Fedayeen will succeed where the armies could not. But for such a task you need to prepare, and you need to prepare well. So, first of all, they left the camps in the Jordan Valley, noticing how easy it is for the Israeli army to strike there. They went into the refugee camps in the middle of the country, where they started establishing their headquarters. And actually something more, they started establishing a state within a state. Already, middle of 68, In reality, Jordanian police cannot enter the refugee camps. And by late 68 already, the Fedayeen started kinda spilling out of the camps into the main cities, including Amman itself, and they started actually taking control. They were showing up in pickups, heavily armored. They don't care about all the civil or military rules. They actually started creating their own rules. For example, their own checkpoints in the main streets of the main cities. If that is not enough, keep in mind that the Fedayeen were not one big organized group. Plenty of little groups were there, and now, with all the money flowing in, something begins that I call auction of radicalism. Especially the little groups, if they want to be seen, they have to keep on being more radical than others, because then they will be seen, more money will flow their way, more people will join their ranks. Hence, auction of radicalism begins very soon, and if we talk about the revolutionary pan-Arabism, radicalism will go towards the left. So soon Marxist, Leninist slogans start appearing, sometimes even written on the walls of mosques. The Fedayeen start reading the red books by Mao Zedong himself. And if that's not enough, Iraq and Syria are already governed by the pan-Arabic revolutionary regimes. So they start creating their own little Fedayeen groups to have control of the possible fall of the Hashemite dynasty. Plenty of Palestinians and the general Arab public were blaming the Arab countries' governments for the defeat in the June 67 war, and Hussein became for many the main scapegoat. Add to that revolutionary pan-Arabism will be by definition against monarchies. Already 68, people start whispering that maybe it is time to change the regime. The old slogan comes back, Jordan, Palestine, Palestine, Jordan, but now in a slightly shortened version. The version is, Jordan is Palestine. What is the reaction of King Hussein to all of that? Well, actually, he cannot do much. First of all, once again, he lost a war. Plus, the fame of the Fedayeen was so big, he cannot do much. His hands are bound. Maybe more interesting is Arafat. He's actually not happy about it. He cannot lose the auction of radicalism, although officially he himself is kind of a moderate, but more importantly, he may be the head of the PLO, but in reality, all those little radical groups do not follow his lead. He is losing control. But maybe most important is what the Jordanians think of it all. Obviously, when you have a huge influx of people, that is going to hurt the local economy. Imagine, for example, all the Palestinians coming into Amman. They want to build new houses. Imagine how spiked the prices of land, of rents. So many Jordanians not only don't like the influx of the new people, but they started blaming Palestinians for the 67 war as such. And on top of that, you have 69 and the Fedayeen and their behavior, which wasn't exactly amicable. So many Jordanians start thinking, those are not brothers preparing to reclaim their home. They are here to occupy us. And true enough, the behavior of the Fedayeen wasn't exactly nice. For example, they would requisite private cars for the sake of the revolution. In other words, they would steal. There's even a story, I don't know if it's true or urban legend, that they killed a policeman, cut his head off, and played football with it in the district where he lived. True or not, I don't know, but such stories were circulated among the people, and there is one more important detail. I haven't found any information about it, but I'm absolutely sure. A man with a gun in his hand and no responsibility, I'm pretty sure they were also raping local women. Maybe the best example of the anger of many Jordanians was the behavior of the army that would not stand by silently. Already late 68, the first clashes between the army and the Fedayeen began. They continued through 69, and by the end of that year, the army feels rather rebellious. They want to end the Fedayeen. This is the ambience when the year 70 begins. And again, the first months, tensions keep on rising. 1st of June, Fedayeen attacked bureaus of the Jordanian version of the FBI, sort of. King Hussein, on his way to see the damage, his column was shot at by the Fedayeen. He survived, but one of his bodyguards was killed. The reaction of the Jordanian army was entering Amman itself and bombarding the main refugee camps, Al-Wehdat, for example, that appeared earlier on. The fighting took 3 days, 300 dead, 700 wounded. Arafat and Hussein, of course, meet, arrange a ceasefire, but the radicals don't care. They entered 2 hotels, Intercontinental and Philadelphia. They took most of the Westerners there as prisoners. They will release them only if Hussein dismantles one of the army units heavily involved in the fighting and deposes some of the generals and politicians from his government. And Hussein surrenders. He did everything as told. So yes, the prisoners were released, but for Hussein, huge public humiliation, and many people, including the famous Henry Kissinger, say, this is the end of the king. Well, they were very wrong. In July, an American peace plan for the Near East appears called the Rogers Plan, which is signed by Hussein and Nasser, who in the meantime became ambassador of peace. Arafat rejects it. He understands if the peace treaty is signed, Fedayeen have no more reason to exist, and of course the radicals are furious. Now they just start talking about revolution. Mind you, it is year 70. In Vietnam, Americans are already losing. So there's a new slogan. They say, the road to Tel Aviv is through Amman. Amman has to be the Hanoi of the Near East. The revolution has to begin here, and now it's not whispers. They start shouting, it's time to depose the king. In August, Fedayeen start attacking the police and the army. 1st September, once again, Hussein's column is shot at by the Fedayeen. The army, of course, enters the city again, yet Hussein is still waiting. He wants to keep on solving things diplomatically, at least officially. In reality, he's still waiting for something else. He's waiting for the Fedayeen to cross the red line, and of course, the radicals delivered. 6th of September, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, one of those radical organizations, hijacked 3 planes. 2 of them were brought to Dawson's Field, an abandoned military airport northeast of Amman. Most passengers were released. Those who were taken hostage were mostly Westerners, of course Israelis or people with Jewish roots. And then 3 days later, on the 9th, they hijacked another plane. It was also brought to Dawson's Field, and again the same thing with passengers happened. But then on the 12th of September, in front of journalists from half of the world, they blew up the planes. They were empty, but they blew up the planes. As they say, they want to attract the attention of the world to the Palestinian cause, and the hostages will be released when the Fedayeen prisons in the western Israel are released as well. Now, the action was most definitely spectacular, or maybe even too spectacular. Arafat again is furious. Again, he cannot lose the auction of radicalism, but he understands very well Fedayeen crossed the red line, and this is exactly what King Hussein was waiting for. He still officially negotiates. There are still some diplomatic moves around, but in reality, he is ready. On the 15th of September, he met with his most trusted people, his most trusted advisors, and they decided that this is the time to strike. Next day, a new government is formed under Mohammed Dawood, a Palestinian but loyal to the king, and the king officially announces martial law. So what begins is what is known commonly today as the Black September. The Jordanian army starts bombing the main refugee camps, Wahdat and Husseini, and the army enters the capital. And urban warfare begins, as the Fedayeen will not give in. They keep on fighting ferociously, and the Jordanian army, they fight ferociously as well. Maybe the best example of the fighting is that the generals told King 2-3 days tops, Amman is ours. Well, it took 10 days of fierce battling. So let me show you this poor intercontinental hotel again. Most of Western journalists were here. Now, all my influencers, YouTubers and wannabe journalists, have a look at some real journalism here.
That was mortar. There was a mortar right in the front garden. We literally cannot move in this ground. We're caught in between crossfire, the Fedayeen on the back of the hotel and to the left, and the artillery are firing directly into our ground. The loud bang you heard then was mortar fire.
Now, this is what I call quality. And this quality they have to maintain while having 1 cup of tea and 1 scone per day. No wonder many of them had dysentery within a number of days. But also this shows you a huge hotel with plenty of stock, and they are out very soon. Imagine the regular families caught in the crossfire in the cities. And I say cities because the fighting was not only in Amman, but every bigger town went through the same. And on top of that, let's have a look at the international situation. In eastern Jordan, several thousand Iraqi soldiers were stationed. Officially they are there in case of a renewed conflict against Israel. They're gonna come and help. Reality, they are there to topple the king. Now, he wasn't stupid. He asked Americans for help. They moved their Mediterranean fleet towards the eastern part of the sea. So Iraqis stayed in the barracks, most probably being afraid of the Americans. In the north, situation is more difficult. Very soon, Irbid fell to the Fedayeen, and they created in northern Jordan Palestinian Republic with Irbid as its capital. And Syria sends help, a brigade of tanks. Turns out Hussein was also ready for that. Actually, I think his biggest diplomatic masterpiece. Israel officially is an enemy, and actually Hussein had plenty of enemies in Israel. Part of the Israeli right was very happy with the slogan Jordan is Palestine. They would be happy if Hussein falls, Fedayeen take the country, then they can say, look, Palestine is there, expulse all Palestinians from the West Bank, annex it, maybe even claim the port in Aqaba. So part of the Israeli right was against Hussein, but turns out already before the Six-Day War, Hussein was in secret talks with the most important Israeli politicians. He has friends there. So through the American embassy, he asked them for help. When Syrians invade Jordan, then the Israelis start flying their planes over northern Israel and southern Syria, ready to bombard the tanks, which didn't have to happen. Turns out in Damascus there was the local Game of Thrones. The chief of the Syrian Air Force did not send the planes to cover the tanks, hoping that his rivals in the party, if the invasion goes wrong, they will lose face, they will lose their standing in the party, and then he can take over the reins of Syria. So the Syrian tanks came in, no air cover, nobody had to intervene. Whatever was left of the Jordanian Air Force could easily bomb the Syrian tanks. Roughly 300 entered, several days later 120 were destroyed. So after just several days, whatever was left of the tanks went back home. And it became kinda obvious after 2 weeks of fighting. Already in late September, it is King Hussein who is victorious in the conflict. The Fedayeen are left alone. And of course, Arafat and Hussein meet again to discuss the ceasefire, this time not in Jordan anymore. They both flew to Cairo and they met with the famous Nasser again. Now, because the conflict basically lasted for 2 weeks of September, because by late September it's obvious who won, common name for the conflict is the Black September, although I think it should be simply called Jordanian Civil War, and there are a number of reasons why I say that. First of all, Jordanians proved that Jordan is not Palestine, that Jordan is Jordan, and also the king proved that his monarchy is more stable than people would assume. So both the king and the people shown they are together and they are stable as Jordan and Jordanians. Secondly, there were some very interesting international repercussions of the conflict. We have this random Pakistan again. There were several military advisors in Jordan, among them Zia-ul Haq. Now depends who you ask. He was only an advisor. Some people say he was one of the people leading Jordanian army in battle. Whatever happened, he gained experience. He went back home several years later, became dictator of Pakistan, till the very day one of the most controversial people in modern Pakistani history. So that's Pakistan. In case of Syria, as mentioned, the chief of the Air Force did not send air cover, the tanks got destroyed, his rivals in the party did lose face, so within several months he, in a coup d'etat, took power, and he ruled for 30 years. Yes, Hafez al-Assad himself, and yes, he is the father of Bashir, who is dictator of Syria till the very day. In case of Iraq, the general of the army stationed in Jordan, Hardan al-Tikriti, as he did not move the army, he also lost face, and very soon lost his life. A year later, 71, he was assassinated, most probably on the orders of Saddam Hussein. For him, the general was one of the last people to remove on his way to power. Fedayeen, expelled from Jordan, ended up in Lebanon, where several years later they are partly responsible for the Lebanese civil war, and as they had no King Hussein, till the very day Lebanon is a country in state of downfall. And finally Palestine. For many people Fedayeen were a bit too much, but for many people they were not too much. Plenty of Palestinians and Arabs in general still supported them. So in 1974, during the summit of the Arab League, PLO became the sole voice of the Palestinian people. 74 is the year when King Hussein loses Palestine officially, we can say. Mind you, he did not give up easily. Until 88, he was claiming Palestine, he was claiming he remains the voice of the people. Only in 88 he actually acknowledged reality. And there's an interesting detail. If he doesn't give up Palestine, it means, for example, administration of the West Bank is paid by Amman. It is an interesting detail, I guess, to keep in mind, but although it is 74 when King Hussein officially loses the West Bank, I consider September 70 as the moment of the split between Jordan and Palestine. Thirdly, the most radical of the Fedayeen created a terrorist group they called the Black September, so they kind of created the common name for the conflict of September 70. They are today most famous for killing Israeli sportsmen during the Munich Olympics of 72, and I think in a big way they are responsible for the fame that Palestinians have kinda till the very day, that Palestinian is a terrorist, and it is a very unfortunate legacy of the Black September terrorist organization, I think. And fourth and most important thing, it is the moment when the relation between Palestinians and Jordanians have to be written anew. What is interesting, it was, I think, not even an ethnic or national conflict at the beginning. I think the conflict was more ideological. Some of the most radical Fedayeen were Jordanians. For example, Mr. Hawatma, who appeared for a second before, he was from As-Salt. On the other hand, not all Palestinians were leftist revolutionaries. Many were conservative, religious. There were plenty of Palestinians who are loyal to the king. Well, during the Black September, Prime Minister was a Palestinian. The head of the CIA, Jordanian version, Palestinian. Plenty of Palestinian soldiers in the Jordanian army. And actually, Hussein himself said after the conflict, his biggest fear was the reaction of Palestinians in the army, and most of them remained loyal. Only 400 roughly deserted, and only one important officer was among them. So, in theory, the conflict, I think, was more ideological than national or ethnic. I think it actually began as a conflict between monarchy and revolutionary pan-Arabism, so let's call it the revolutionary left. And I think it actually began as such, but very soon it became something else. It became an ethnic national conflict between Jordanians and Palestinians because, well, in the end, true enough, most Fedayeen were Palestinians, most soldiers in the army were Jordanians, and especially considering how fierce the fighting was. Let's say it one more time. Generals said 2-3 days. It took 10 days to win the battle for Amman. And both sides were ruthless. The Fedayeen would shoot at everything that moves. Mostly what moved were Jordanian civilians, and the Jordanian artillery pounded mercilessly the refugee camps Al-Wahdat, for example. Till the very day, we actually do not have proper established statistics. Most of them are taken out of the blue. I think the closest to reality are between 1,000 and 2,000 Fedayeen were killed, at least triple the number of Palestinian civilian casualties. Jordanian army, up to 1,000 were killed. I found no statistics on Jordanian civilians, but there must have been some victims on their side as well. But here we have one of the examples how the conflict is becoming ethnic, not ideological anymore. And we're only talking about September 70 here. October 70, a new prime minister, Wasfi Tal, the one who appeared in the previous episode, he in the 60s was twice prime minister already, very popular. Supposedly the king himself was kind of jealous, and he was considered pro-Palestinian back in the day. Both Jordanians and Palestinians loved him. Now he becomes anti-Palestinian. October 1970, he is prime minister, and he decided to oust all Fedayeen from the country. Keep in mind, they won the battle for Amman, but Irbid is still in the hands of the Fedayeen. There is still the Palestinian Republic there. And Wasfital was actually raised in Irbid. So on top of ideological issues, I think he also had a personal vendetta against the Fedayeen. So in the end, slowly but surely, he started ousting all of them from the country. And it took a while, but July 71, the last of them leave Jordan. But that's not the end of the story, as then plenty of Palestinians start losing their post in the army, administration, whatever that would be. There was a huge purge of Palestinians who were not seen as trustworthy enough. Another layer in the ethnic conflict here. So Wasfital became, let's call it, the face of anti-Palestinianism, and he paid the highest price. Black September organization maybe is most famous for the Munich massacre, but their first victim is late 71. Wasfital in Cairo was shot by two Palestinian terrorists from the Black September organization itself. And as he was very popular among Jordanians, Palestinians killed him. That's adding salt to injury. And actually, I did find in many sources such a phrase. Before the Black September, everything was perfectly fine between Palestinians and Jordanians. It's the conflict that created the rift. I dare say it is not true. I dare say the rift was already there. But true enough, the conflict of 70 to 71 created a much larger rift between the two, especially that after October 70 it became pretty much exclusively an ethnic national conflict, not based on ideology anymore, or it was in the background only. And it is a huge wound in both the Jordanian and Palestinian hearts. And I know it because of one simple thing. The Black September, the civil war, does not exist in Jordanian public space. There is absolutely nothing. When you go to the museum in Amman, in the old parliament, you have the kings there. When you read about Hussein, year 70 doesn't exist. One of the reasons I went to Irbid was to find something from the time of civil war. I thought maybe there's going to be a monument to the Jordanian army. I mean, they took back Irbid, the capital of Palestinian Republic. There's absolutely nothing. Nobody wanted to talk to me about it, especially in front of the camera. I think in the Jordanian society of today, the Black September, the civil war, is the biggest taboo topic. So don't you dare go to Jordan, meet some Jordanians and say, "Hi, hello, how are you? Let's talk about Black September." I talk about it here because it's history, it happened, and we should talk about it, but don't dare going there and think you can take it lightly. It is not a light topic. Maybe the wound has 50 years. It's a long time. Well, not there. A scratch or two are enough and the wound will begin bleeding again. Still, Palestinians do live in Jordan, so they had to find some kind of modus vivendi. And I think one of the first things they had to go through is sort of Jordanization. They had to accept some bases, some fundaments, and I think the base for Jordanization is complete acceptation of the royal family. I think it is the absolute baseline here, and I also think most Palestinians actually had no trouble accepting this fundament. But here we actually come to a very important question. How many Palestinians are there in Jordan? Well, we can do it in a very simple way. Just look at the number of refugees. More than 2 million people in Jordan have Palestinian refugee status. But then again, people intermarry. You have kids who are half Palestinian. They don't have any more status of refugee. Well, but they can count as Palestinians. So if we take 2 million plus of refugees, that's already 30% of Jordan. I found info 70% of Jordanians have Palestinian ancestry. So I would say let's cut it in the middle, 50%. 50%. This is something we call minority. They are at least half of the country. That is not a minority exactly, is it? And I think the very number here is the main reason why it's difficult to talk about Palestinian identity in Jordan. They are not little minorities well defined like the ones we had in episode number 4. It's millions of people. So I think it's actually a whole spectrum here, and I guess the simplest way to see it is those who are older and of lower social status will feel more Palestinian, less Jordanian, and conversely, young, high status will feel more Jordanian with some Palestinian identity sprinkled here and there. And between those two kind of extremes, of course, plenty of options and choices. Still, a number of details can tell us about identity. Kafia is a simple thing, gray Palestinian, red Jordanian. Supposedly there are things in the language like accent or words only Palestinians use, but my favorite example is supposedly Palestinian house. When you enter, you smell two things, thyme and fenugreek. Supposedly that's how Palestinian houses smell. Jordanians don't use it. And yet, supposedly for many people, there is another very important symbol of Palestinianism, a club which is in the place that kept on popping up in Al-Wahdat, which is, by the way, till the very day, officially a refugee camp. Although if you go there today and you don't know, you will not be able to tell a difference between it and a simple district of Amman. You have to use Google Maps. It's chaos everywhere. Wahdat is ordered. Well, it was built as a refugee camp. And there you will find the Al-Wahdat Club, which is pretty much one of the most important symbols of Palestinianism. Let's look at the motto. Allah Wahdat, Arab Jerusalem. And the symbol is the dome of the rock itself. It is definitely a club with a strong Palestinian identity. They have kind of officially 4 million affiliates. So you may say, well, that's easy. 4 million Palestinians in Jordan, right? For example, a receptionist in our hotel in Amman, East Banker, for generations, he is fan of Al-Wahdat. So it's not that simple. Of course, there is nothing about the civil war here, but there's a very interesting detail. The club was founded in 56, renewed in 74. 74. It's an interesting date. Anyway, there are plenty of awesome photos from all the decades past. Also, you will find there plenty of cups. They have several sections, but the most famous is of course the football section, which is today the second most important and second most successful club in the Jordanian league. There's only one more successful, Al Faisali, their main rival, and today it's the club of the so-called nativists. So those who are for generations from the East Bank. So those are the main derby in the country, and I think you can easily guess hooligans of the two clubs clash. And one club nativists, the other club Palestinians. I think you can see that the issue is still there, at least in the hooligan version, still alive. But it is not the nativists from the Al-Faisali who are the main enemy of Al-Wahdat. When you enter the club grounds, this is the doormat in front of you. And this is something, I guess, that unites all Palestinians in Jordan and beyond, anti-Israelism. So don't be surprised, for example, seeing such maps of Palestine as souvenirs. I think the idea of a two-state solution is not very popular among many Palestinians in Jordan. And sometimes it gets a bit absurd. Whatever with Palestine is in public space, like the poster here, well, there is a word Gdynia, which is a Polish port, so it's basically a poster aimed at European Jews who in the interwar period would visit Palestine, and some of them would buy only one-way tickets. So here's a little fail. But the extreme version of anti-Israelism is from 97. 3 years before, in 94, Jordan finally signed peace treaty with Israel, and there were some land issues. There was a piece of land where Israeli farmers would work for decades. Now it's in Jordan, so Jordan gave them extra 25 years to work there. And the place became known as the Island of Peace. And there were even ideas to bring young people from both sides to meet and break down the barriers. So one of those days, in 97, a group of 80 teenage schoolgirls arrived there. A Jordanian soldier of Palestinian descent, Ahmad Dakamsa, started shooting, killed 7 of them, and wounded 6. Now, he got caught, of course, and sentenced to only 20 years, as officially he had psychological issues, which means he was released 2017. He lives in his village in the north of Jordan, supposedly in peace, and there are people who consider him till the very day a hero. He himself never repented, very happy about what he did. The only thing he regrets is that he couldn't kill all of them. But I have to say also, other Jordanian soldiers, when they saw what's going on, ran and stopped him. Most of people in Jordan do not consider him a hero, but a murderer. And King Hussein himself went straight to Israel to meet the families of the killed girls, asking them and the country pardon in his personal name and in name of Jordan itself. And that has to be told as well. But generally speaking, here's another taboo topic in Jordanian society. I do recommend avoiding the topic of Israel at all possible costs. Now, before we finish, let me introduce another important Palestinian in Jordan, Queen Rania herself. But she is actually from another wave of Palestinian immigration, a forgotten one. In 1990, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, more than 200,000 Palestinians are there. Pretty much all of them go to Jordan, and Queen Rania is from that wave of immigration exactly. The forgotten one. Now that Saddam came up again, let's deal quickly with a number of extra issues. 2003 American invasion of Iraq. Again, plenty of refugees come to Jordan, Iraqis this time. And actually, many Jordanians till the very day consider Saddam Hussein a hero and a martyr. Already in the 80s, when he was fighting against Iran, plenty of Arabs saw him as a hero, and till the very day, they blame Kuwait for being the provocateur of Iraq. Of course, all of that paid by the West. So they see Saddam as a hero of the old days, and of course, they see the American invasion of 2003 as an absolute disgrace and a crime against the Iraqi people and against Saddam himself. So don't be surprised to see his face on plenty of cars in Jordan. And of course, the Syrians. If you travel around Jordan and you see refugee camps as we kinda envision them, those will be Syrian refugees today. And this is a story not only for one episode, but a full series of them. And unfortunately, this is something that I cannot do. But Syrian refugees, of course, are in Jordan as well. And Egyptians, well, not as refugees anymore, but if you are in Petra and you're going to a restaurant in the nearby town, you can be pretty sure your waiter is going to be Egyptian, as Jordan has better wages. So let's have a look at it for a moment. Another important word comes up: stability. Look at the ironical twist here. For decades, the governments of Jordanian neighbors were against them. They were calling Jordan a colonial creation, a country without history. And look what happened. Those very same countries today are more or less but in shambles. And this colonial creation and country without history became now a new home for thousands and millions of citizens of the neighbors. Some of them come as refugees, some of them come as workers, and I'm pretty sure for many of them life in Jordan is hard, but they get here something they don't get anywhere else in the Near East. They get stability. And considering what's going on in Israel these days, Jordan is not simply the only Arab stable country in the Near East. Jordan is today the only stable country in the Near East. Period. And I keep repeating this word stability because I think in the general Western world we actually don't really understand how important this word is. And I will repeat, for many people in Jordan life is not easy, but still I think in the Near East the word stability is much more important than what the Western world is used to. That's also, I think, what gives Jordan the power to assimilate its minorities, even those that are not a minority. So when it comes to Palestinians in Jordan and their identity, I think we have actually more questions than answers, and I don't see anything wrong with it. Even if we don't get answers, some questions, let's ask them anyway. Maybe the answers will come eventually one of those days. So I leave it as an open topic. But even without the answers, I think we can draw a conclusion. Jordan is a fascinating place. And those of you who need more to draw this conclusion, and you stumbled upon me now for the first time, go back to the introduction to the Great Jordan Adventure, start from the beginning. But now, this is how happy we are as we are finishing this episode. I am very proud of you. You plowed through, and fantastic, as such topics have to be covered properly. In our next episode, we're going to relax. It's going to be shorter, and we're going to visit important ruins. Not Petra yet. We are going back in time to the ancient Roman Empire. And on a beautiful day full of sun, we're gonna walk the streets of one of the best preserved cities from the Roman times. So, from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much, and I will see you very soon.